welcome to the Ask the Experts session here at Build. We have two teams to answer questions around Azure Container Apps and Cosmos database. So please type in any questions you have for either of those technologies. Both of the teams had a lot of announcements here at Build, as you know. For Azure Container Apps, we actually just went general availability, so that's pretty exciting for us. We do have a question while you all are typing your awesome questions, one that's come up many times. So Ahmed, do you mind taking that first question about scaling to zero?
Yes. So I guess the question is, can you scale to zero for container apps when your application is not receiving any traffic? Presumably here, HTTP requests traffic. And the answer is yes. You have under the scale property in the container app or scale in the portal, you will have min and max replicas. You can set the min to 0 and the max to 10, for example. And then if your application is not receiving any traffic for 5 minutes by default, it'll scale down to 0. And then once it starts receiving traffic, it will scale back up. You can also control how many instances it needs to scale to, depending on the number of requests. So in the scale rules, you can specify an HTTP scale rule, and you get to specify a concurrent request count. So for example, if you want to set the concurrent request count to 50, that means if you exceed 50 requests per second, then we add another instance, or you can set it to like 10. And every time you exceed 10, you add another instance, and so on.
That's great. Thanks, Ahmed. Deborah, I think you had a question there.
Yeah, so we have a question here around burst capacity in Cosmos DB, which we just announced in preview yesterday. Burst capacity allows you to basically use unused capacity to handle database spikes. So the question is, how does burst capacity work with autoscale, since we also have autoscale in Cosmos DB? The way to think about this one is autoscale in Cosmos DB today gives you a guaranteed 10x scale range factor. So if you say you want to scale between let's say 100 to 1,000 RUs, we'll never scale you beyond 1,000 RUs, regardless of your workload. So this is great for guaranteed instant scalability, but if you ever need to scale beyond that sometimes, that's where burst capacity comes in. So burst capacity basically gives you a 5-minute window where you can accumulate a rolling 5-minute window where you can accumulate idle capacity, which can then be used to cover spikes in the future. So you'll get guaranteed 10x with autoscale, and then if you have intermittent spikes and you didn't use the capacity in the last 5 minutes, or you have leftover throughput or idle capacity, we can go even beyond that 1,000 RUs what you provisioned to handle those intermittent spikes. So requests that otherwise would have gotten throttled would eventually succeed, so you'll get better performance.
Awesome. Thanks, Deborah. We have a question here that's actually being answered by one of our teammates, but I think it's something that's been asked a lot. So Ahmed, I know you're still typing on this one, but the zero downtime came up a number of times over the last couple of days. Do you want to take a pass at that question?
Me? Yes. So instead of slots, like the question asks if there is a staging slot and warm-up, instead of slots, we have the concept of revisions. Every time you change your image, for example, or you change configuration, we create a new revision for the app. So if you set the active revision mode to multiple, by default it's single. So every time you change, the traffic shifts completely to the new revision. But if you change that to be a multiple, then you can set 100% of traffic to go to the current known good revision that you have. If your app, then when you deploy a new version, like you update the image or you update the configuration or you change anything that affects the app, then a new revision will be created, but by default, no traffic is going to be sent to it. You can then either hit that revision directly. Each revision has its own sort of URL or domain or host. So you can hit that revision directly if you want to warm it up or check it or make sure that everything there is good. And then you can begin to slowly shift traffic if you want, like you can assign maybe 10% to it and 20, or you can just shift traffic 100% directly to it. And then that will be how you achieve no downtime.
Excellent. Thanks, Ahmed. Justine or Deborah, did you want to field another Cosmos question?
Sure, I can take this one as well. So the question is, for Cosmos DB partition merge, is support for shared throughput coming out soon, or is it a long way out? Yeah, so today with the current version of the preview, we only support merging your dedicated throughput containers for SQL and Mongo API. Shared throughput databases is definitely very high priority for us, and it's something that we're actively working on. So I don't have a concrete ETA to promise today. It is definitely the next highest priority for us to support that.
Great. There's a question here about container apps and private endpoints. I see Kendall had to restart, so Sanchit, Vinny, can one of you take that around, do we support private endpoints, and anything you can elaborate on that?
Yeah. So currently we don't support private endpoints.
And to clarify, we do support bringing your own virtual network.
Yes, we do support. Yes, we do support bringing your own virtual network. You could deploy your container apps environment with your own virtual network, and you could have both an internal load balancer facing environment or an external environment where your request from public internet can reach onto this environment, and any resources on this environment can talk to anything on your virtual network.
Excellent, appreciate that. There was a follow-up on the previous one, just real quick, Justin, as far as scaling to zero, whether there was a kind of a warm-up time when that next request comes in. And there is a warm-up time. It's very small. They seem to wake up, let's say, very fast, right, Sanchit, Vinny? As far as that warm-up time after something scales down to zero.
Yeah, I mean, if the app scales down to zero, when the next instance come up, it's going to be whatever your app cold start bootstrap is. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have any more Cosmos questions? We have a few more container app questions, but I think there's maybe some Cosmos ones also down there. Deborah, Justine? Okay, if not, I'm gonna ask my team. I don't know who wants to answer this one, but it's again around scale. It's a really popular topic today, which is great because that's one of the amazing benefits I think about Azure Container Apps is that ability to scale from just 0 to infinity. That's my Toy Story line for today. But the question here is, how quick will those scale out rules trigger? The example, and maybe you're reading the same question. If you scale based on HTTP requests over 100, will it scale out as soon as it hits 101, or will it take the average over a certain number of minutes?
Yep. I can take that one.
Thanks, Ahmed. I appreciate you taking that one.
So the scale decision is computed every 15 seconds by default today. So if you are at 100 and you then move to 101, it depends on which in that 15-second window you land, and then that's when the scale decision will happen. And that's also true for all other triggers, not just HTTP. So we support like queue triggers, Kafka, RabbitMQ, Redis. All these event sources, we're using CATE10, so all the event sources that CATE10 supports. We support the unique one in container apps is HTTP, but essentially the scaled rules are evaluated every 15 seconds by default.
Great, thank you for that. Deborah, Justine, I think I saw another question down there for Cosmos. This person's experienced in SQL Server, but no experience with Cosmos or NoSQL. What would be the benefits of moving to Cosmos from like a SQL Server?
Yeah, I can take this one.
Thanks, Justine.
So first of all, if you're using SQL Server and it works for you, obviously that can be definitely a valid choice. Cosmos DB as a NoSQL database does offer many benefits though. We are a fully managed, globally distributed database, so you can add new regions to your database with just one click. We offer a schemaless, flexible, data model, so you can write your data, and if your data model evolves over time, you don't need to worry about any rigid table structure. And we also are a scale-out database, and we support very high throughput. So that means you can seamlessly scale out and get more throughput without having to, provision a bigger machine. So there's many benefits of NoSQL databases, but it's always important to remember that in the context of your application, you can decide the database that fits best for you.
That's great. Sorry, mute button problems. Great, thanks for that. Here's a question, and Voss or Vaclav, I'm coming your way. I didn't expect this one, so I'm not sure what the answer is going to be here. But the question is, I'm moving from Azure or Service Fabric to Container App. What challenge could I expect? And then also estimated cost. I don't think we'll get into costs here, but what do you think some of the challenges might be moving from Service Fabric to Container Apps?
Well, I would hope that there would be far fewer challenges coming to Container Apps. If you're coming from Service Fabric, I think the main thing is that it depends on how you are running your Service Fabric applications. So if you were making use of the Service Fabric programming models, those obviously aren't available in Container Apps. So if you're coming from a guest exe or a guest container on Service Fabric, then I think the transition will be fairly straightforward. Mostly it'll be around the operational aspects of how you run the application. So the big difference is with Container Apps, you don't own a cluster or VMs. You only own the application and the containers that you run, which also affects the cost model. So regarding the cost model, I think that the biggest factor will be how densely you are packing services onto your Service Fabric cluster initially, because here you are basically getting charged for the CPU and memory that your containers consume rather than the VMs that you're running can consume. So that's the main thing to take into consideration, is that it's basically the guest container model that we had in Service Fabric. And there is no underlying clusters, so the cost model is different. And the best way probably to estimate that, I don't know. If you were able to estimate roughly how much CPU and memory your Service Fabric applications were using initially, then you can use the Azure cost estimation tools to kind of get a sense of what that will end up costing you on Container Apps.
Right. Awesome. Thanks, Voss or Vaclav. And that's the one thing I was thinking about from Service Fabric, since you and I both worked on the tools and the product. It's that programming model. So if you were leveraging stateful services or the Service Fabric actors, that's where some changes to the code probably are going to be needed. But operationally wise, it should be significantly easier. Deborah, Justine, did you have another Cosmos question down there? I'm trying to scroll down. Okay.
I can.
Great.
So I can answer one question that I've gotten a lot just from various channels from getting the feedback about burst capacity as well. So one common question we're getting there is, so you're talking about this 5-minute window where you can accumulate idle or unused capacity. How does that 5-minute window work? Is it always there, or is it a rolling 5-minute window? So it is a rolling 5-minute window. So basically you can have at most 5 minutes of unused accumulated capacity. So if you have, let's say, unused capacity from yesterday, that won't apply today. But if in the last 5 minutes your application didn't fully use all its throughput, it'll be available for to use in the next upcoming second. So every second, that 5-minute window will just keep sliding over.
Excellent. Kendall, while you were fixing your computer there, we had a question around private endpoints. So if you wanted to elaborate more, we talked about the fact that you can have your own, bring a virtual network. But if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, the only thing I wanted to add here is just while the service itself doesn't require private endpoints, because we have the internal only VNet integration feature, which allows you to have that internal load balancer. I just wanted to clarify, you can still make use of private endpoints to securely connect to other Azure services that are within your Azure subscription. So for example, if you have a storage account, a SQL database, and you want to securely communicate from your VNet integrated environment to those services, you can certainly use the private endpoint capability. And that's, whether you're connecting directly or if you're connecting through Dapper. So just wanted to make that call out and differentiate sort of the difference between the service itself having a private endpoint and being able to use private endpoints from the service.
Excellent.
And if I could, can I add one more thing to that? Just to call out, so while we don't support private endpoint, you can, as Kendall mentioned, deploy an internal only container app environment, which will get an ingress IP from your VNet. And then you can set up Azure private DNS in order to be able to call these apps that are in your internal only environment from other components that are deployed into your VNet.
All right, great. Thanks, Kendall, Evan. And Kendall, I'm going to keep you on the spot here because there was a question actually about Dapper. Oh, it was actually a comment you made. Go ahead and make that comment. I think that's interesting around Dapper and actors.
Oh yeah, the only other thing was if you're migrating from Service Fabric and you're using the current actors model, because that is something that a lot of customers value in Service Fabric, you can use the Dapper actors pattern that we support in container apps. So just wanted to call out if that's an element in that migration that we do have comparable capability there. So
great, appreciate that. Thanks. All righty. There's another question down here for the Cosmos folks around partition merging. I don't know if you wanted to take that, Deborah or Justine.
I think we answered the one about share throughput database for merge, but we do see another question. Oh, I see, actually. Okay, so there's two new questions.
Yes.
Let me take the one about table storage since it came in first, then we'll get to the merge one. So the question on, if I don't need the low latency and global distribution of Cosmos DB, is Azure Storage Table still a viable choice? Yeah, I think in general, with all the Azure services, based on what is required for your workload, if you certainly don't have requirements around high throughput or adding multiple regions, there's no need to necessarily use a service that has that if you don't need it for your workload. That said, for Cosmos DB does offer a native tables API as well. We also support serverless for that model as well. So that means that if you need features like maybe you don't need higher throughput or multi-regions, but if you want automatic secondary indexes for more flexible querying, or if you want you can take advantage of the serverless billing model as well. So if you don't actually use the container or have very infrequent requests, you'll only get billed for the RUs actually consumed. So I think if it's working fine for your workload, it's definitely fine to use the product that works best. If you want to look into benefits as well, we'll share a link to Tables API in Cosmos DB.
Excellent. Thanks for that. There was another one around Dapper that was asked earlier, and that is Dapper required to be used as part of Azure Container Apps? And the answer is no. Dapper is there. It's built into the Azure Container Apps, let's say, infrastructure, and you're welcome to take advantage of it. It's a great way, if you're building microservices, it's a great way to get a lot of common microservice abilities, just much easier. But it is not required, totally optional. I know we talk about it a lot, but it's totally optional. We had one more here. I don't know if Daria or Kendall wants to take this, but it's around kind of the differentiation between container apps and Kubernetes service. When would I use one Daria versus the other as far as that situation of that question?
What we hear from customers for that question is that a lot of times their differentiating logic is not in the management of infrastructure or the orchestration of infrastructure, it's in the business layer. So for any of those apps where the differentiation is at the business logic level, we would advise Azure Container Apps. If customers need control of the Kubernetes API or they need, in general, deeper control in terms of management and orchestration, then they have the option to use the Azure Kubernetes service, which is great. And the other thing that I would point out is because we run on open source, we run directly on the Azure Kubernetes service, we strive to maintain app portability. So it's not a one-time decision, but it's an opportunity to continue reevaluating those decisions across the lifetime of the app. Kendall, do you want to add anything?
No, I would just say, I think, and I know there's another question that came up, so I'll just kind of add it in. Is there a migration path or tool from an existing AKS deployment of an app to container apps? So I think, when it comes to container apps and AKS, I really like to think of container apps serving a very specific purpose, which is how do we bring a PaaS-like app service experience to microservices? And so there's going to be a lot of capabilities. We had an earlier session on AKS that don't necessarily map one-to-one in container apps because they're more advanced capabilities. So if you need to work with the Kubernetes API and do things like taints, tolerations, really specific Kubernetes actions using Kubernetes manifest, for example, that's something that's going to be a great fit for Azure Kubernetes Service. And so we'll continue to iterate on ways that we can make container apps easier to port to. If, for example, AKS is not a great fit, or if your team doesn't have the ability to manage that at scale. But also we want to think about ways that we can migrate from container apps to AKS as well, right? So if there are situations where you find that the container apps capabilities are no longer meeting the flexibility you require, then we will be investing in not just documentation, but tools and approaches that can optimize that migration path experience. So it's a great question. We would love feedback from all of you, frankly, on what that would look like and how we can be most helpful in kind of making the portability story as strong as possible.
Great. Thanks, Daria, Kendall. Deborah, Justine, there was a question about backup options for Cosmos. Do you want to take that?
Sure,
Deborah.
actually, I think maybe we're off by one. I know. I'll take the partition merge question since that came in before.
Okay, great.
Like we're always off by one, and
I know. Sorry about that.
It's all good. Okay, so the question is, will partition merging a container remove the minimum requirement of highest RUs ever provisioned on the container divided by 100? Yeah, so good insight there is that partition merge is really useful when you scaled up super high in terms of RUs and now want to scale back down without having so many partitions and few RUs on each. So what happens is when you merge partitions, we reduce the number of partitions and we basically reset the highest RUs you've ever provisioned. So in most cases, depending on how much you're going down, you can pretty much get to the minimum entry point for Cosmos DB. So for example, if you were at, let's say 100,000 RUs and you had 10 partitions and you realized you only needed 400 RUs, which is the entry point, you can go 100 partitions goes to, or 10 partitions goes to one partition potentially, depending on how your data is laid out. And with one partition, you can basically get 400 RUs. So the way to think about it is basically intuitively, the more you're trying to scale down, the more additional hops there might be. So let's say you had like 1 million RUs and 1,000 partitions, right? Pass one of merge might scale you down to 10 partitions, and then you might have another merge pass to scale you down to 1. So the higher scale range you're trying to go down to, the more hops it might take. But in general, merge basically resets your highest RUs ever provisioned to whatever your new partition count is times the 10K RUs per partition. So it's as if you started with that as your highest value ever provisioned in the beginning. I'll try to give a concrete example in a doc since I know like there's a lot of, it's a bit more abstract, but I'll reply here as well.
Sure. I'll take the question for the backup. So Cosmos DB provides 2 backup options. One is the periodic backup mode, which is we try to take a snapshot every 4 hours in default mode. And 2 of them, these copies are free, and you can extend these copies. The new mode that we have enabled for customers is a continuous mode, which allows you to do restore at any point of time down to a level of second in the 30 days. So today we support maximum 30 days backup. We do have long-term plan to support the long-term retention. And I don't want to take the specific years, but that is on roadmap. Today, most of the customers basically do extract from the Cosmos DB and store in storage account of their own and move forward. Okay. And there is a question about do I get the compression for data at rest? Wait a minute. Okay, so that's a great question. Cosmos DB does have an internal encoding which does the compression which is required to provide those benefits, right? So now what we have to remember, right? We also have 4 copies of data within for every 50 gigs of data. So the compression and everything is will be there. Plus, for availability reasons, we provide that capability. So we do extend a lot of benefits just rather than just compressing everything down to a small minutes. Right. What I would definitely request is look up deeper into the elasticity features that we have announced today, as well as the existing ones. They will ensure that we do as comprehensive, we provide as comprehensive benefits for you to take advantage of the elasticity while taking care of your size.
Great, thanks, Govind, for that. That was awesome. We are about out of time here, so I just want to give folks on the call. Looks like there's a number of attendees still. If you have any last-minute questions, we've got 4 minutes left here. One thing I wanted to mention that was asked earlier and in some other sessions today was what is the SLA for the new general availability of Azure Container Apps? And the answer to that, it's currently 99.95% availability. I think we have a document with that if someone wants to throw the link in there, otherwise I can later. And then there's one other one here, is Azure Container Apps a good fit for heavy web application load or just microservice? Daria, do you want to take that one?
Happy to. I think when you make the decision, it's not just about the load, it's about how you expect your app to evolve. Because if you think of Azure App Server, it is a primitive that is specialized for web. But if you expect your app to expand from web to a broader microservice with higher complexity functionality, then you should probably plan ahead. And we have brought some of the capabilities for the web workload to Azure Container Apps. So we recently announced custom domains and certificates. So please consider the broader architecture and the broader pattern for the apps that you're bringing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Alrighty, there's a really important question up here, which is, where is the party tonight? Now that you're out of preview. So yes, Tomer doesn't know, but it's at his house, so you can all join us there if you want. Anyways, there was another question here. Oh, I see, Daria, you answered that. Thank you. That was around the difference between container apps and native cloud apps. And so Daria answered that in the chat really well. So appreciate that, Daria. And Kendall, you answered the scale. So that's great. Deborah, Justine, did you have any more last minute questions you wanted to answer or any comments to say? Before, maybe this is my last time talking, I'll just say thanks very much. We have about 2 minutes left, but I want to say thanks for joining us. And I'll continue looking for questions, and I'll turn that over to Deborah or Justine for maybe the last answer or comment.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to echo thanks so much for all your great questions, and looking forward to seeing the feedback for all of these features. I think there's maybe time for one more backup question, Govind, if you want to take any of them. Otherwise, we can just answer them
sure.
offline.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not able to get the question. If you can just paste it, I'll definitely take it. Yes.
Okay.
Apologies.
So the question is, what are the backup options for Cosmos DB? We have a requirement for storing 4 years of data. How would you support that?
Oh, yeah. So as I was trying to explain earlier, the 4 years worth of data backup is not available out of the box in Cosmos DB today. Maximum that we provide is 30 days. The way, and that feature is on the roadmap. The way we would advise is to take out the data and store in a storage account, and that's how many of the customers are taking care of those pieces. And if you need help, please reach out to us.
Excellent, thanks. So it does look like we're out of time. I want to say thanks again to the team, both teams here, Container Apps and Cosmos DB. And yeah, with that, have a great day. Have a good rest of build. Thank you.